Hello and welcome to another episode of Reflections of the Father's Heart. You know, in Revelation, it says that they overcame by the blood of the Lamb and the power of their testimony. So, this is the second part of a deeper testimony that I started releasing in the last episode. It's parts of my story that were not included in the book because they actually came after I wrote the book. So, if you haven't listened to the last episode, episode 22, I just want to encourage you to go listen to that. You'll really need it as the backstory for where we're going to go today. Now, just like in the last episode, I want to put it out there. Trigger warning, just know that I am going to be talking about satanic ritual abuse. And I'll be sharing a little bit more about what that is and give some of the detail to what I experienced. So I just want to warn you that that will be in this episode, okay? I just have to tell you all, oh my goodness, there definitely has been a battle to me releasing this. I have felt the resistance and I almost wanted to not do it, which if anybody knows me is not like me. But it just tells me that this really needs to get out there. So in the last episode, I shared what I had known of my childhood, right up until 2018, things that had happened, abuses that had happened, and then the backstory to how it came to be that I was sitting in my office and the memories of ritual abuse from 8 years old were starting to download. And so that's when I came to discover that I had been satanically ritually abused. Now, I know that's a big word. We're going to substitute it with SRA for short as we walk through this podcast episode. But SRA is a lot more common than people realize. And again, I talked about this a little bit in the last episode, but SRA was starting to be a lot more widely known in the 90s. And then there was this whole movement of its satanic panic. And so a lot of the survivor stories and a lot of the people that had come out with things, it was squashed or it was put as, made up stuff. And so it was kind of buried. But I was really astounded, as I mentioned in the last episode, when all of these stories started to come into my feed on YouTube. And I started to hear stories of people that had been ritually abused. And I started to learn about it. And then I came to this point of realizing, oh my goodness, I've been ritually abused. Those first memories that came in as, as it started at 8 years old, like I mentioned. And further along in my story, I did connect with the fact that actually there were, on the other side of the family, there were some really horrible things that happened younger. But where I was in 2018 was this gasping of breath. Oh my goodness, this has happened to me. I don't know if I have words to describe what it felt like in the moment. Typically, when somebody connects with memory like that, there's an aspect of, okay, this has always been there. And then another aspect of complete shock. Our mind works so diligently to try to protect us from the things that have really harmed us. And that was the truth for me. So I'm sitting on this couch and I'm realizing I had been taken to this church and I had been taken to the basement of the church, oftentimes at night, and rituals had been performed there in the basement. I would love to tell you that my story is an anomaly, but the truth of the matter is I have worked extensively with people who have been ritually abused, and it's not uncommon for ritual abusers to use religion as a cover-up, as a guise, right? They're infiltrating God's kingdom for wickedness. And that's exactly what was happening here in this small church in a very, very rural community. And so I was taken to the basement of the church. Now, rituals, some of the things that I experienced in rituals, there was blood. I was made to drink chicken blood. One of the horrors that came to me is I saw a puppy dismembered. And so if you would have known me as a little child, I was very similar to how I am now. I am an animal lover. And so that experience, especially when that one hit with the puppy, it was beyond, right? It was beyond nauseating, beyond terrifying, and beyond devastating. But that is what they were doing, is terrorizing me. They were devastating me. And then there was a lot of sexualization. In Satanism, there's a lot of sexualization. So I was raped multiple times. And I'm going to give you some of the backstory as to why these things happen and what they're actually doing. But I do want to say, for any of you listening who have never heard of this this is what happens. These are the things that happen, and we have to know as believers how to combat this, because if I did not have a relationship with Jesus when I connected with all of this, I don't think I would be sane. But the truth of the matter is that God in his mercy waited until 2018, when I had a lot of healing under my belt, to show me these things and to help me through it. And so the puppy was torn apart in front of me. There was a lot of sexualization, a lot of rape. There was a baby in the rituals that I experienced. Now, I do not know if the baby was already dead. In other words, I don't know if that was a miscarriage or an aborted baby, or if it was a baby that was alive and then had been killed. I don't know. Sometimes they will do mock ceremonies, and as a little child, you really don't know the difference. But again, for me, as a little girl, I also had an affinity for children and for babies. And so to see this was absolutely terrifying and terrorizing. And it happened over a period of time. Even after we moved out of my grandmother's home, I would often go to my grandmother's home and spend the night, and my uncle would be there. My grandmother was kind of like another child. My grandfather had died. My grandmother was a very, like I said, kind of childlike. She was fun, but I could stay up as late as I wanted. I could eat what I wanted. I could do anything that I wanted. She was also prone to either naps, or when she went to bed, there was no waking her up. So she was completely, at least to my knowledge, completely oblivious of the things that were happening. And like I said, that uncle would often stay there. He had marital issues, and so he would often be staying at my grandmother's. And so that church was run by another pastor who had been a best friend of my uncle's all through high school. So they were in this together. There was a whole ring in that area, and that is not uncommon. It's not uncommon for professionals, doctors, dentists, police officers, attorneys. There was an attorney involved as well, to form a ring. And they do this for power. They do it for power. The more you terrorize a child, the more you can control them. The more you terrorize a child, the less chance that that child has of remembering. Drugs were used in the rituals that I was in, so there were times that I was drugged. I do remember one time my little sister being there. She was like a year and a half. And I do remember her being there and just, being witness to some of this stuff. I only remember her being there the one time. And I was there repeatedly. Like I said, I spent a lot of time at my grandmother's, and I was there on the weekends. In the summers, I would be, I was there the whole summer. And I do remember there would be times waking up at my grandmother's. I would often sleep in the living room on the couch or on the floor. And I do remember there were days I would wake up and just feel really sick, pounding headache. But of course, because this abuse and because rituals are so absolutely terrifying, it was really buried. The other thing about rituals is that because they seem almost unbelievable, oh, that's something that you would see in a movie. That's something that only happens, in books or horror films. It's often hard, even for the person who's been through it, to believe it. I didn't have that issue in 2018. I 100% knew it was true. God had led me there step by step, and it made so many other things make sense. Why that church, that church was so familiar to me. Yet previous to these memories downloading, I only remember driving by it one time. But yet, as soon as I saw it, I knew. And so I started to connect with all of these things that had happened. Like I said, the horror of my uncle and how terrible he was. Now, he was known to be crazy. I mean, honestly, this man was known to be a psychopath. He was known for that. And so it wasn't, again, not shocking, right? That this was the man that had brought me over there. This other, man, supposedly a pastor, obviously not. Satan masquerades as an angel of light, obviously not. And what a cover they had in this church. Again, the church didn't have houses next to it. It's very rural. It was kind of offset by itself. And again, in a basement, they could do whatever they wanted. And that's exactly what they did. The point is also to terrorize the child, not only so that the child is more easily controlled, not only so that it's not believable, not only so that the memories get really buried, but the sexualization is for power and to access more demonic power. And so it was a lot when I started to connect. I was really devastated. And at the same time, like I said, there was a bit of relief because I knew something else was there. I knew I had been on this healing journey. It was like a searching healing journey that I had been on. And so there was an aspect of, oh my goodness, this is it. But then what to do, right? What to do with all of this. So by this time, this particular uncle had disappeared. He had left his wife, which is my aunt. He's my uncle by blood, and my aunt was, only by marriage. He had left her. They had long been divorced. He basically stole money in a terrible way from one of my cousins. I mean, a lot of things had happened. And just to give you some insight into this particular man, even when I was growing up and even memories that I had before I connected with this, when he became religious, he was, how do I say it? Zealously religious, but in almost a sadistic way. I remember him telling my cousin who was my age that, he was going to go to hell for the music that he listened to. And he just had this really harsh, again, almost psychotic look that he would have in his eyes. I later learned from my cousin that this uncle, his father, used to torment him, used to pinch him when nobody was looking, literally torment him. And later on, this cousin of mine, he became a very big guy. When he got older, he ended up beating up his father and putting him in the hospital because his father had stepped back into their lives and was abusive to his mom. And so anyway, this uncle had disappeared. I did try to track him down. I am still taking some steps in terms of some other things there in that area in New York with things that have happened, but it's in process. However, as I connected with this and as I connected with these rituals and the things that had happened to me, I reached out to a counselor that I had worked with in the past. She did have some experience with satanic ritual abuse. And so she did do some prayer work with me. And I also did a lot of it on my own. And some of that was just, gosh, I think what God knew is that I had built up such an intimate, trusting relationship with Jesus that I was going to let him into those places because I trusted him to heal. I think one of the things that I see with satanic ritual abuse is that the inner world, those little broken parts, trust has been so obliterated. And often the ritual abuse is done under the guise of religion. So God is brought into it. And so it's done in this way where, the whole inner world is so distrustful of even the name of Jesus. That's why it's also done under a religious guise. So it can make the healing process slower. It's almost like the inner world has to understand, oh, I can trust Jesus too. But I do feel like by that point, so much healing had happened that bringing these wounded parts and bringing Jesus to these wounded parts was something that happened a little more readily for me. And so the healing process in this didn't take as long. It was more the facing that took time. But what I want to share with you all is what happened. So when I took a trip out to Texas, and it's all tied in with this. So around that time, I was also in training. I've been a grief recovery specialist since 2010, and I was in training to be able to offer 2.5-day intensives. And now I'm a trainer and, I do all of that stuff, but I was in training. So I went out to Texas right around the time that all this stuff had come up to get trained to be able to facilitate the 2.5-day intensive. And so basically I just went into a training because the first 2.5 days are the intensive. And I went out to Texas because a friend of mine was the facilitator there. I had to do it under a few facilitators. And so I picked Texas because I knew her. And so part of training is the first time was participating. And so I decided that I was going to do the grief work on this uncle. Now, if you haven't done grief recovery is about dealing with the undealt emotional pain with any loss. And as horrible as this could be, and it is, and as much as I had done, Jesus had come and he had, and I needed that, hands down. And I do believe there's some of the emotional pain that he just took. As much as that had happened, there was still a huge loss to be grieved. This was an uncle. This was somebody who I should have been able to trust. And this was somebody who had not only obliterated me, but again, taken advantage of the fact that I was such a lonely child. I believe that is part of the reason that so many abusers in the family got their hands on me, because my home was so broken and my heart was so broken and my soul was so broken. And we moved a lot, and I, didn't have a lot of friendships. And so I desperately desired attention. And because I was the one that tried to be really perfectionistic, I wasn't prone to speaking up or asking for help. And so I believe that that's a big reason why he took such advantage of me. So I go out to Texas on this trip. Now, as I was dealing with all this, right? Like as I was processing this. So now we're in 2019. As I was processing this, right? And all this stuff. Oh, I'm sorry. No, it was 2018. My bad. It was 2018. As I was processing all of this, I had gained a lot of weight. And it wasn't like I was eating a bunch more. I just think my body reacted to what I was discovering, right? So my body's reacting to what I am discovering. And then I go out to this training. And so I had gained quite a bit of weight, and I'm not very tall. So, 20 pounds on me is a lot. And I don't know how much it was, but I had definitely gained a lot of weight. It was very visible. And so I get to the training and I decided to do the personal work on this uncle. I decided to deal with the undealt emotional pain through the tools of grief recovery. And I have to tell you, the spiritual battle around this trip was so intense. We met at a hotel. The training was at a hotel. One of the times we left to go to lunch, and as we were leaving, the hotel was stormed with all of these men with AK-47s that were basically there. They were there because they were doing a drug bust. And so we were shut out of the hotel for a while. And I remember when I actually read the timeline of events that I recalled, and it was so intense. It was so intense. My body felt it physically, and then doing the completion work to release all of the boulders and all of the things that I was carrying, again, was incredibly, incredibly intense. And I was staying with some other friends of mine, and, I was able to talk with them and process with them. And I'm so, so grateful for that. God really did put some great community around me. And then it was over. And I felt like I had released so much. And I was so excited to get back home, and so excited to bring this new level of healing to whatever place God wanted me to bring it to. And I left really early in the morning, and I got to the airport, and I got on the plane, and it was one of those times when I was like, yes, because I got on the plane and there was plenty of open seats. It's a Southwest flight. You could sit where you want. I sat down. I sat in the aisle seat. There was somebody at the window seat. There was an open middle seat. I'm like, this is going to be such a relaxing time. The plane's all dark, because it's so early. We're about to leave. And I have my head down. I'm pulling out my Bible, about to read, and I hear a voice say, hey, is that seat taken? And I remember just feeling like, oh, man. And I look up and this guy is standing there. And he was a kind of a larger guy. He had all these chains, like gold chains around his neck. And I just thought, man, why did he have to choose this seat? There were so many open seats up to me. But so I said, sure, sit down. And so I'm there, and he kind of strikes up a conversation. And so as he strikes up a conversation, he asked me a couple questions, and then he said, so are you spiritual? Like, what are you? And I said, oh, no, I'm a Christian. I said, that's my Bible right there. And he's like, oh my gosh, I just did ministry. I'm just coming from ministry. And so I kind of shifted to, oh, this is so cool. So we start to have a conversation. And in the beginning, it was a good conversation initially. But then he started to say things like, wow, I'm really getting this sense that you are, doing too much and that you need to rest. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's so crazy. I just blocked out Mondays on my calendar. I'm going to be seeing less clients and opening up more space for me and for God. And then as he kept talking, something in my heart shifted. And I started to recognize that even though he was saying things of God, and even though he seemed to know scripture, something seemed wrong. And then he asked me if we could read out of the book of Job. And he said, I don't have my glasses. Will you read for me? And as I read some things out of the book of Job, he said, what was Job's problem? What was Job's issue? And I kind of looked at him, and he said, it was pride, just like you. And I went, whoa. And I said, excuse me, I'm going to go to the restroom. And I went to the restroom, and I want you all to see this scene. I'm on an airplane. It's really, really early in the morning. My flight left at like 4:30 in the morning. The whole plane is dark. Most people are asleep. So I'm basically sitting next to this man with one little reading light on, and the whole rest of the plane is dark. So I go to the restroom, and I'm praying. And I said to the Lord out loud in the bathroom, I said, I know your voice. I know your voice, and this is not your voice. This is the enemy's voice. And I felt this nudge to go back to my seat. And so I went and I sat back down. And as I sat back down and this man continued to talk to me, he started to make these little jabs like, wow, your Bible's really clean. Look at mine. Mine is so tattered. And it was. He had taped it. You would think this guy's just been in his Bible. But after a while, and remember earlier in the conversation, I had shared what I did. And, I work in grief recovery and inner healing. And so at one point he looked at me and he said, he said, I have 4 personalities. And I just looked at him and he said, do you want to know who they are? And I said, well, I don't know if I do, but I guess you're going to tell me. He goes, oh yeah. He goes, there's little Carlos. There's me, who's big Carlos. One is a woman, and she is so sexy. And he looked at me and he said, and guess who the 4th one is? Eyes changed. And he said, the 4th one is Satan. And I will tell you, I looked at him and I said, oh, really? Have you read Luke 10? And he said, what? Oh, he knows all the scriptures. And I said, okay, well, let's read it together out loud. And so I pulled out the Bible and I pulled to Luke 10 and it says, where Jesus is talking to the disciples, right? The 72 return with joy. And they said, Lord, even the demons submit to us in your name. And he replies, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. I have given you authority over all evil. You will trample on snakes and scorpions. Nothing will harm you. And he was a bit mocking. He was like, huh? I go, oh no, let me share it again. And I repeated the scripture again. And after I repeated the scripture, he kind of made a little joke, but his eyes changed back again. And then a little bit later in the conversation, again, it's not a long, it wasn't a long flight, fortunately. A little bit later in the conversation, he grabbed a piece of paper and he said, I want to show you something. And he took this piece of paper and he drew these little like dots on it. And he said, most people are like ants. And then he drew a circle around it, and another one, and another one, and another one. So it becomes wider and wider, not a perfect circle, but like a shape around the circles that became wider and wider and wider. And so when he was done, it was an odd shaped, almost like a bullseye. And he said, yes, you see, most people are like ants. He said, you're like an elephant. He goes, but let me tell you the thing about elephants. And he drew an X through it. He goes, they make great targets. And I have to tell you, it was such an experience. I can't say that I necessarily felt afraid. I knew I was in a safe area. I knew that there was nothing that could attach to me. I knew it was an assignment, and it was exactly the dynamics of the uncle that I had just done the completion work on. Here was a guy professing to be a Christian who was fractured into different personalities that he was well aware of, operating really and truly in darkness. And so as we were getting ready to land, he looked at me and he said, so what do you think I should do about the Satan personality? And I just looked at him and I said, Jesus will deliver you from that in a moment. He said, yeah, you're about the 100th person that's told me that. And I just thought, wow, this guy doesn't want to be rid of this wicked power. He doesn't. Now, the Bible says that we are to be gentle and shrewd. So even though I wasn't scared on the plane, I made sure to not disclose any personal information. He asked for my phone number. I wrote down the wrong number. He asked how I was getting, back from the airport. I said, I was married at the time. I said, oh, my husband's coming to pick me up, which actually was not true. But in the moment, I just wanted to make sure that he didn't think that I was leaving by myself. As soon as the plane landed, I jumped up, I grabbed my carry-on, and I walked out. I got into the airport. I was at LAX and hit where the carousel is for the luggage. And mine was the first bag off the carousel, which never happens. Usually at LAX, you're waiting forever. Grabbed it, walked up, got in my Uber, and off I went. I never forgot that experience. And I feel like what God showed me and what he has showed me since is how the satanic kingdom works. I think as believers, we have to understand that the satanic kingdom is organized. It's so different from God's kingdom. And I do want to say that even though I have been through satanic ritual abuse, and even though deeper and deeper layers were uncovered after, where I discovered that actually some of it happened on the other side of the family even earlier, and that Satanism is in both sides of my family, and that people really operate in some serious darkness and devastation. Even though that is the truth, it is also true that Jesus does heal and he does restore. However, understanding how it works, I think as believers, we don't want to be unaware of the schemes of the enemy. And so the truth of the matter is that where the kingdom of God is mutually submissive, we do have lines of authority in God's kingdom. God being sovereign, right? Sovereignty means there's no one beside him. There's no one above him. The buck stops there. He's sovereign. Sometimes people want to make that mean he's in control, as if he controls every event that happens. But that's actually not what it means. It means that he is the final authority. There is nothing that can come close to our God. And so even though there are lines of authority in God's kingdom, they operate in mutual submission, just like a marital relationship. There's lines of authority, but it operates in mutual submission. So if the husband is loving the wife as Christ loved the church, and, wanting to be willing to die for her, and then the wife is actually submitting to that love, that's the kind of submission that we find in God's kingdom. The kingdom of Satan is totally opposite. The kingdom of Satan is militant. It's a top-down system. Satan is at the top, and then everything is underneath in order. all the way down to the bottom. What that creates in the satanic kingdom is a desire to move further up the ladder. If you've ever studied out any cult systems, Scientology being one, or some other cult systems, they often operate very similar to that because it's a satanic system. It's a narcissistic system, but it's a satanic system. The kingdom of Satan operates like that. The more that a Satanist terrorizes children, terrorizes people, we're God's creation, right? He hates us. The higher up they go. They also get to move higher up for infiltrating churches. So if they infiltrate a Christian church, sometimes you might see somebody that comes in, they'll infiltrate, they try to go after the pastors, they try to go and split the church. That they get points for that. They get to move up higher for that. What do they get in return? Power. Now, it's a short-lived power, but they're promised obviously something very different. In Satanism, obviously they're very deceived, right? They have a very different set of beliefs. But that's the difference in how the kingdoms are ordered. And it is true that there are people that have been ritually abused that don't know it, that may have it's called like a satanic programming. There may be parts of them that come out that they don't even know about, because satanic ritual abuse can cause multiple personality disorder. In my case, it did not, but what it did cause was a lot of fracturing. So fracturing means it's not like I would lose periods of time, or like other personalities would necessarily come out and be totally different and distinct. It's just that I walked around very fractured, very splintered, very disconnected. And so God has been putting me back together ever since. It's just important that we understand that, because as believers, we have to realize that. Now, the condition of the soul of someone who's been satanically ritually abused is it usually looks like layers. It looks like the soul is divided into layers, and there's little parts of them in all these different parts of the soul, and there can be different demons guarding these different parts, and it can seem so overwhelming. And I'm here to tell you that with Jesus, it's not. It's not. I've taken a crash course in this. Obviously, some of this becomes very familiar because I was actually raised in it. I was subjected to it, and it definitely is a devastating experience to recover from. However, I am here to say that recovery is possible. Now, after that is when more and more layers started to be revealed. And so after I left the marriage that I was in, and a bunch of stuff happened in the church that I was a part of, and I was advocating for somebody who'd been abused, and they tried to cover things up, and it was horrible. So obviously I left. I was continuing on my healing journey, and I had moved, and I was living in this small Airbnb, and God brought me there. And it was a season of, you're not going to have your animals. You're going to have a season of just you and me. And I remember one day I was in the room there. It was a bedroom, but it was a cool area, but the spot itself was kind of dark, kind of isolative. But I would just be alone with Jesus. And I remember being alone. I was with Jesus. I was, eyes closed, and all of a sudden I saw it. And I knew immediately what it was. It was like a mound of dirt, and there was grass around it and trees around it. And I instantly knew that it was a grave. And immediately I went, no, I can't go here. I can't see this yet. I'm not ready. And so 2 months later, I was doing, some more healing work, and really starting to heal from, obviously there was my uncle, but then there was the other man that was involved, right? So I was starting to do the healing process on that, and just make sure that I was dealing with any of the incomplete pain. And as I was writing it out, all of a sudden, I wrote out, the child that you killed. I realized that I had stuffed that memory, and that I hadn't wanted to look at it. And so God in his mercy and in his gentleness, waited until I was ready. And so Jesus and I together went to discover what I had seen at 8 years old. There had been more. There were things that also happened in my grandmother's basement. Now, again, remember, the only thing across from my grandmother's house was a big pasture. Like if you walked out to the street, you'd have to look way, way down the street to see a house. I mean, we're talking, these are very rural areas with woods in the back. I mean, behind my grandmother's home, there was nothing but woods. It was a big lawn and woods. And so again, anything, right? Anything can happen in those areas. And I believe that Satanism can happen anywhere, but I do believe that in those rural areas, sometimes you can get those stronger rings because of that. And so basically what had happened is I had seen a 5-year-old boy be murdered at 8 years old. He was drugged. I was there. There was nothing I could do. And I think that was one of the hardest things for me to process and connect with, was there was nothing that I could do. I don't know exactly where he came from, but I'm guessing it was probably, it might have been an abduction or a foster care situation. I don't know. Clearly it was a little boy that, even now, it really breaks my heart because it was such a hard thing to see. And my heart breaks for that little boy. And I was 8. And so what I was told after by this uncle was that God sees. And basically he led me to believe at 8 years old that this boy was being punished by God, and that if I said anything, God would know, and then I would be punished. So I was absolutely terrified. I thought if I said anything, I was going to be killed. And so I didn't. And of course, it got really, really buried. And so when I connected with this particular memory, I had reached out to the counselor who, knows Satanism and has had experience. We had made an appointment, and I, reached out like, okay, I'm getting ready, because we would do it on like Skype or something like that. And I get a text from her, and she's like, oh my gosh, Sandi, I had you down for next week. And she's like, I'm so sorry. And I remember all this frustration just welled up inside, and I just started sobbing, and not because she made a mistake. She's a lovely woman. It had nothing to do with that. But I just felt so alone and so scared to try to carry these feelings forward. And I went, and I didn't know what else to do. I just went and sat in my chair, and all of a sudden I looked up and I said, oh my gosh, God, you want to do this one, you and me. And so we did. Jesus came. And in those kind of situations, it's like we serve a Lord who is not bound by time or space. He's omnipresent. He's omniscient. We're linear. We have back there, we have today, and the time that we're going to. He's all of it at once. He's not going to change the memory. It happened. But what he will do is go back to that place where that little 8-year-old girl was so stuck in the memory of watching this happen and having no power to do anything, and then being absolutely terrified, and actually touch her and take the lies and take the pain and the terror and the fear and heal her and bring her into wholeness with my soul. And not only that, Jesus actually took me up to heaven to say, I want you to see where this little boy is, and I want you to know that he's okay and you don't have to worry anymore. And it was so beautiful. And to take the lies about who God is, and it's really the enemy, right, that was speaking. And it was so amazing, and it was so beautiful. And it was such a significant healing moment for me. And I've had many of those. And unfortunately, what the stories that I've shared with you, though, there's unfortunately many more of those. I've seen a lot of horror. And yet, again, God has just healed and healed and healed and healed. And what's come of that is I've had the opportunity to then walk with people who've been through satanic ritual abuse, and many of them under a religious guise. And, obviously it's Jesus, it's not me. But I do believe that because of the healing that he's brought me through, one of the things that he's given me is this belief in the truth. It doesn't matter how dark it is. Jesus heals. At the same time, I think that one of the things that happens for people that have been through SRA is they have a lack of community, a lack of understanding, a lack of people that can help them, because it's something that's so buried within our society. It's very, I don't know, it's one of those things that people think just happens every once in a while. It doesn't. And I'm here to tell you that even in the professional world, there are conferences specifically for SRA. The reason being that as therapists and psychologists started to compare notes, and social workers, what they started to discover, obviously they're not breaking confidentiality, but as they're, doing case study, they started to discover that stories like mine were happening all over the place, and that the stories were very similar. And they started to realize that SRA is a very real thing that happens. And so there are SRA conferences to help professionals have understanding and language for these types of things. So it's a very, very real experience, and it happens to so many people. And obviously I'm releasing a testimony, but I'm also advocating for people who are out there who have been through this, that there's help, there's healing, there's hope. I just want to throw some things out there that can happen for people that have been through SRA. As a harmed, but I was forced to harm, and then told, how horrible I was because of what I had done. I mean, there were sacrifices and things that I saw that were just horrifying. What they did to animals, what they did with blood. I'm reading this book. It's called The Chemistry of the Blood. That's Whiskey, everyone. He's come to say hello. He's so funny. He's been sitting up there so calmly, but I was like, oh, he might join us. It's called The Chemistry of the Blood, and it gets into all this understanding of the pure blood of Jesus Christ. And I'm not all the way through it yet, but it's a phenomenal book. But even as I was reading it and I was just so enthralled, I realized how the Satanic kingdom always twists God's kingdom. And so they use blood also, because life is in the blood, power is in the blood. So they use blood, but they use it for evil and for wickedness. And again, I feel like there are people that just partner with it. And there are other people that go through it that don't know they've been abused, that, don't know and sometimes, get triggered into things and don't realize it and then come to a realization. And then there are just people who partner with it and are enthralled with the power and the wickedness of it. That was definitely my uncle. He was not operating under some program. He liked the power, and he liked having the power over me. It's really interesting. As a younger child, I always knew that him being my mom's younger brother, that he was jealous of my mother. And so as a young one, I looked a lot like my mom did as a little girl. And I feel like that was part of why he took so much glee in terrorizing me. Now, for anybody out there thinking, how could a child possibly go through those things and it not be so visible? I'm going to tell you, from me to you, you'd be shocked at what children can experience and still function. You would be at what a child can experience. Children have a resiliency that is almost supernatural. And it's a resiliency in that helps them survive as a child, but obviously as an adult, it can be very, very disruptive. So for a child, they will split and split and split and split immediately. that terror will cause them to split over and over and over and over and over again, and then they'll function, especially when abuse happens really young. A lot of my abuse, even, with my father and other family members, started really young. So I think I split really easily. And so I would just split off, split off, split off, split off. And then this outward part of me also had learned to function in so much dysfunction that I just kept going. And I can tell you there are so many wonderful, beautiful, amazing people that I have journeyed with who've had the same experience, where same as a child, you would not have known what was going on. Now, I do think there were probably some signs, in the sense that I was painfully shy, afraid to speak. I mean, obviously, if I had had connected parents, they would have known something was wrong. But because I lived in the family that I did, all of this outward stuff happening was completely overlooked. It really didn't matter how I showed up. It didn't matter what I looked like in terms of my emotional countenance. That didn't matter. I was pretty severely neglected. And so that was the other side of it. I didn't have anybody notice that anything was even wrong until I was like in 9th grade. But again, by that time, it was just a little blip. Other than that, everything was very, very hidden. And so as I was healing, as I had mentioned before, right when I went on that Texas trip, as I was as kind of connecting with everything, I gained all this weight. And then as I healed, it's like the weight literally just came off. It's funny, I talk about how I believe health, inner health, soul health, emotional health, mind health is also part of having healthy body. And that was definitely the case as I healed from this and have been healing from this. There have definitely been other parts of the story that have come to light, things that have happened, again, in a rural area. On the other side of the family, there was a huge farm. Barns are a big area for ritual abuse. The whole area that I grew up in is a big area for ritual abuse. And so it's definitely been a lot of layers. One of the other things that does happen when people are ritually abused is they do things like they call them like magic surgeries. And because the mind of a child is so sponge-like and so forming and so believing, right? Like as a child, if an adult shows you something or tells you something, you believe it. So they'll do these, like they call them magic surgeries. And it actually is a way to also fracture the soul. And the more that you can get somebody to split and fracture, the more you can control them. The fact that I left my family system is a miracle of God. It really is. Because I think the only one in my family to actually get out. And then I'm definitely the only one to speak out. So that has been my journey. Like I mentioned, there have been other parts of my story that I have connected with, and I will share those on a future. But I have to say, sometimes the hardest thing is to trust Jesus. And I don't fault anybody who has a hard time with that. I know that, again, God, Jesus sometimes are used in rituals as a way to really put space between the person being abused and the only one who can truly save them. And yet at the same time, I know that Jesus is the only one that can truly heal SRA. I think there's other tools that he gives us that we can use, and they further the healing journey. And he's definitely done that with me. But even those tools follow his principles. So I just wanted to say that, thank you so much for listening to this story and just being a part of this testimony release. And there will be more to come in the future. Just remember, if, anything has come up for you, I will tag some resources under this podcast. There is a woman that I think her name is Patricia Clark, and she has a website and she has some books, and it was super helpful. Those were really great resources for me as I was walking through my own journey. But just know that even with that satanic programming, right? Satanic programming is, remember, what does God give us, right? How many, right? Creativity, imagination, free will. What does Satan look to steal? All of those things, our creativity, our imagination, which, right? Because what does that do? That kills our belief, and he looks to steal our will. So satanic programming is about that. It's about stealing somebody's will and getting them to do things that they wouldn't normally do on their own. Oftentimes, people that have been through a lot of SRA, what they need is to heal and regain the power and all of the things that God gives us. And so he's looking to overtake that. He's looking to steal their identity. I had no idea who I was. And God has just been showing me more and more and more. So God is the restorative part of this. Jesus restores. I'll tag some resources below. God bless everyone.